Mic test 1 2 3. Mic test 1 2 3.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Penang Institute again. Well, tonight I'm personally very happy for Penang Institute to host Dr. Francis Loh Kok Hua. Now, Francis Loh is one of the best-known scholars that Penang has produced, at least in the last few decades. And of course, I'm proud that he and I came from the same school, St. Xavier's Institution. He belongs to that special group of scholars of Southeast Asian studies who were trained in Cornell University in the 1970s and 80s by the likes of giants such as Benedict Anderson and George Cain. Back here in Penang, he was professor of politics at Universiti Sains, Malaysia until his retirement in 2012. That's the academic career of this very influential man. Where social activism is concerned, Francis Loh has been an important figure for several decades as well. He was, for 2 decades, honorary secretary for Aliran, the multi-ethnic, multi-religious NGO based in Penang and very well known throughout Malaysia. And he was its president for 5 years, from 2011 to 2016. And anyone studying Malaysian politics in the last decades had much to learn from his writings. In fact, they were compulsory reading. Still are. Today, he is senior advisor to the Forum of Federations based in Ottawa, and he conducts courses and workshops on federalism, decentralization, and inclusive governance in Myanmar. It is in that capacity that he's here today to enlighten us about the political situation of our neighbor up north across the Andaman Sea, and about the new bottom-up federal democratic movement that has appeared since the military coup in Myanmar 6 months ago. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Francis Loh to Penang Institute. Francis, the floor is yours. You can stand or sit, whichever you
start by standing. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the very kind introduction, Dr. Wiki Beng.
Yeah.
And it's my pleasure to be back in Penang Institute. I think the last time we did something here was with Meredith. And he was supposed to be the moderator, but he fell sick.
You're right.
So
I'm
it's
fine
all
today.
this very tight group, that gets together and hold their functions here. So let me just start off by, by clarifying that I'm a neophyte when it comes to Burmese studies, and I didn't study I studied Southeast Asian politics, but it was not worth our while studying Burma because you couldn't get it. Hardly anybody then went in to do research there. And although they taught every other language, in the Southeast Asian area at Cornell, but no takers for Burmese, except Defense Department people. So I had 2 buddies who actually, one went to Defense Department, the other one went to the CIA, and they were trained there. Anyway, so after I retired, then I got picked up by this group called the Forum of Federations. It's sort of like a mini NGO, which, INGO, mini UN, in fact, and it pulls together different federal countries. So the biggest sponsor of the group is actually Canada, Canadian government. They actually fund this whole effort, and they feel that their own experience with how they handle the Quebec problem, they're a lesson to teach, to share with other people. But it also includes India, Switzerland, Nigeria, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and of course Australia. But we didn't want America in the group. So because they'll come and overwhelm you, with their kind of federalism. So they're not. The Malaysian government was also invited, but like when you join the EU, there's a few terms that you have to actually fulfill. The Malaysian government didn't fulfill those terms, so in the end, they were not brought in. So anyway, there are now 25 people in that group, and through the auspices, I've been able to go to Myanmar from like 2012 up to recently, and I must have made like 30, almost 40 trips. And each trip that I go, I spend about a week, 2 weeks there. And at one stage, it was like almost every month. Usually it's about once every 3 months. And it has been a big eye-opener, and I've fallen in love with the country. I really enjoy being there. And more than that, I've been inspired by what's happening there. And the young people, they are so very different from the young people here. They're less seduced by all this, what I call developmentalism, here. So anyway, so let's get going then. Very quickly, this is the title. For people who don't know Burma much, 14 parts to it. 7 are called states, 7 are called regions. The 7 regions are dominated by basically Bama people, the Bama majority. And they're in the center of the country. And all around it, north, south, east, north and eastern part and western part are the highlands, and they are peopled by actually the minorities. And the population there the density is less, but these are called states. They're not called, the others are called regions. And many of them are Christian groups. You have, this is Kachin state, a lot of fighting going on there. This is Sagaing is a region. And then here is actually Arakan or Rakhine. No, there's Chin and then Rakhine is here. So this is, then Rangoon is down here. So this is Shan, the biggest state in terms of size. So this is how the breakdown of this place is. Very quickly, it's a bit of a horror story. Very, very poor. It's right at the bottom, of all the Human Development Index. I've got a breakdown of this by, various kinds of other categories, but it's not, it's just very sad. In the 2014 census, the last that it was taken, before that, the last one prior to it was 30 years before that. So they've not done any census. So they did this, and the population, about 88% Buddhist, Christian, some 6.2, Muslims, 4.3. 1.5 million Rohingya, another 2 million non-Rohingya, and then Hindu animists and so on. The last, in 2014, the population was close to, I think, 51, and then now it's increased to 54.4 million. Serene images of Myanmar, very nice, Buddhist majority country, lots of temples, monks, nuns, beautiful in the morning. Young novices collecting alms, studying scriptures, but also a land where allegedly this genocide took place, of the Rohingya. Some 700,000 people evicted, chased across, out of the country. A land which has also been ruled by a brutal military regime for extended periods since independence in 1947. And 1962 to 2008, before the military stepped back, it was still ruled by this military regime. The background: Burmese army has ruled the country as though it was warring against its own citizens. This book, written by this famous scholar Mary Callahan, it's called The Enemy, Warring the Enemies. Sorry? Making Enemies. Yeah. And she says that actually the army never ever stopped fighting. Initially, they fought against the Brits. Then they began to fight against their own people. And the way that they ran the country as a military regime was they divided the country into 2 zones. The inner zone, like I showed you just now in the map, the center part, 2/3 of the population live, majority. And here, the regime, because it is Burma dominated, was very benign. Even if you're very naughty, like the communists, okay, we will re-educate you, we will give you social welfare programs to win you back. However, in the front areas where minorities, mostly non-Buddhists, resided, they adopted the 4 cuts policy. Deny the insurgents food, funds, intelligence, recruits. Does it sound familiar? Of course, this is the Chinese New Villages in Malaysia during the emergency period. Also the strategic hamlets, in Vietnam, But very often, that's too expensive. Resettlement is very expensive. To isolate people from, to deny the insurgents food, funds, very expensive. So very often they resorted to, let's do the three alls: burn all, kill all, loot all. Depopulate their ethnic areas, burn their villages, push the minorities seen as a security threat across the border into Thailand, China, India, Bangladesh. And over this whole 4 decades, about 500,000 people killed in this process. So this is the same strategy that we are hearing. And they are now applying it vis-a-vis the Rohingya people. Some 700,000 people ousted, pushed across into Bangladesh. The British, don't forget, did the same when it conducted colonial wars. Very well known, Kenya, for instance. 1988 student uprising was the 888 uprising, the 8th of August 1988. The Burmese people are a bit into numerology. Okay, violently was put down. The last slide was to say, this was the way that they conducted themselves. They divided and ruled, and then they controlled the population. Now here then, it was relatively quiet until 1988 when this uprising took place. It was a brutal manner in which the uprising was put down, very brutal. 3,000 people killed within a week. And so it even led to disenchantment within the military itself. So the military became split. So this, in a sense, people are just waiting. When they're looking at what's happening in the military today, they're asking themselves, is the military getting split? Because if they're split, then there's some hope for change. And this happened then. General Ne Win, the dictator, was replaced by a new group from within, called themselves SLOC, the State Law and Order Restoration Council, which then, first things first, doubled the size of the military, acquired new military assets, and as though it was the most important thing in the world, let us build a new capital city. In the new place. And this capital city is so interesting. It's called an international airport, but there are hardly any planes flying in except from China and Thailand. And the roads leading, main roads are like 6 lanes each way. There's no traffic. But it's all for actually like parades, massive parades. So it's just a lot of money wasted here in the new capital city. They set up then at the same time, because there was all these problems, they set up military business corporations, banks, jams, tourism, they ran hotels, they began to dabble in international trade. And then in 1966, 97, the regional crisis, Myanmar was also severely affected, as was Malaysia. In response to the regional crisis, SPDC, it changed its name from SLOC, it became SPDC, State Peace and Development. And now they welcome the FDIs, not just from China, as everybody always alleged, but actually India, Thailand, very, very big investor, and Japan as well. But of course, the Westerners, probably they're a bit jealous that these people are beginning to go in for the first kill. And they were still disallowed. The EU was still sanctioning, and the Americans were sanctioning. But this regime also thought that it was time for us to begin to open up not just the economy, but open up the politics as well. So a new constitution was introduced, 2008. They allowed parties to be formed. The elections were held, and the military party, USDP, won a majority in the 2010, not the whole country, but limited elections. In the next round, Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the NLD, boycotted that election, but in the follow-up elections, 2015, the party decided to run, and they won hands down. But of course, we know she was not allowed to become its president because she was married to a foreigner, a Britisher. More interestingly was what began to happen to the economy. And for me, this is extremely important because it helps to explain, the little blurb that I was talking about, how it was just an coup d'etat protest, how they morph, how they evolve into a huge, mass movement, calling for overthrowing everything and starting again, and this, in a sense, is in some of these data that I began to, dig out. Yes, like the rest of Southeast Asia, East Asia, it moved towards liberalization, deregulation, and privatization, the neoliberal economy. The rest of Asia was doing it. Mahathir was doing it. Korea was doing it. Suharto was doing it. So Myanmar also, let's check it out. So they came and they did this. The market-based exchange rate of the Chad was introduced. Before that, it was decided upon arbitrarily, and sometimes it was ridiculously high, and this is give reason for the black market to begin to exist. But now it was okay, let's depend on the market. So it allowed investors, foreigners, to have confidence to come into the country. Liberalization of car imports. When I first went there in 2012, every vehicle was like age old. And the beautiful thing about it was they knew how to repair these 30-year-old cars and all that, and they used it again. It's sort of like the scenery you could get of Havana in Cuba. So it was like this. So there was, now they liberalized it. And they also liberalized the IT industry. Smartphones began to emerge, computers. When I first went there in 2012, to buy a SIM card, it was 500 USD. Of course, it's just to price you out, and today it's like, $5, So it's completely different. Apart from MPT, which was the original state-owned company, now they extended the licenses to Ooredoo, which is based in Qatar, Viettel from Vietnam, and Telenor, I think Norway, is it? Yeah. So the price of SIM cards then all collapsed. And because you're now using smartphones, of course the Chinese, imports are available and very, very cheap. So nowadays, every other person in the urban area, old folks to young people, they all have a smartphone. More so than actually people here, I think. Establishment of foreign banks. To 2012, the banks, the hotels don't want to deal with your credit cards. And the internet machine, completely unreliable. Internet banking was out. ATM machines, few and far between. This period then began to, the top exports, this period is gas. And who is doing gas exploration and mining in Myanmar? Of course, it's Petronas. So Petronas is there. Its presence, I used to bump into these people in the same hotel. Now and then there's a big cyclone coming up in the Gulf of Martaban, and they take a holiday, because they come out. So this is the gas, 36% of the total, then gemstones, seafood, wood products. You can see that it's still very, very extractive economy. It's not NIC by any means. Like our highest earners, revenue earners are the finished products, and electronic goods, textile garments, electrical, but not here. Top imports, on the other hand, are road vehicles, food and beverages, textile, telecommunication materials, and so on and so forth. So this is the nature of the economy. During the time that I was there, you could see regulation to have license was withdrawn for trading, for doing business was withdrawn. And then you also have then more hotels, tourists, shopping malls. There's the biggest shopping mall in downtown Yangon. It's actually owned by the people who developed Pan Pacific, Kuala Lumpur. And it is exactly the same. It looks exactly the same. You cannot get lost if you know how to get around, Pan Pacific in Kuala Lumpur, you can get around here. So the first point I want to make during this period of transition, 2010 to 2020, some 10 years. First few years was under USDP, the military-dominated party. And then from 2016 to 2020 was the NLD, Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD. So this period, the structure of economy begins to change. Look at this. Not even. Agriculture used to be about 57%, it begins to drop quite drastically. You see this happening in a place like Malaysia as well. We're down to about 15% here, in Malaysia. So industry begins to climb. And then trade, I suppose is mainly international trade, also begins to climb. Previously it was an autarkic economy. It didn't dabble with the rest of the world. But now it wanted to do exactly that. GDP, this is all my data in this part. All this data is actually from World Bank. I just, you'll be surprised that actually you can get everything down from the internet. So all this is just there. So GDP begins to come. Look at this. From 6, during this period, 37, it doubles. So this is the critical period, okay, 2010 to 2020 that we're looking at. GDP per capita also begins to rise. And foreign development, foreign direct investment as a percentage of GDP also begins to climb. Yeah. So although the last point is a bit, but it's not, yeah, it's still generally a climb upwards. FDI in current amount, so it rises again from 161 million to 1834 million for that year in particular. These are not cumulative. Okay. Net official development assistance received because you are now no longer an autocracy. You were democratizing. You were in transition. The Western aid started flowing in as well. So here, oops. So you see this beginning to happen. It rises. This is the aid that they'll receive, more than actually the FDIs. United Nations, but also EU countries, America, Japan, ASEAN itself, personal remittances. This is from our foreign workers. It's actually very, very high. It's the highest of all these categories. They've got 1.5 million people outside the country registered. So it's a lot of these figures. Now, first point, economy transforms itself. People's livelihood begins to improve. People actually want more of this. Oops. This is access to electricity. Percentage of the population significantly begins to grow. 41.8, it rises from 2010 to 48. Hardly not much growth here, but it certainly jumps to 70.4. Electricity, because you want to recharge all your batteries if you're using the handphone. Use of internet, percentage of population rises to 35% from nothing. 1% at 2010. 35% of population now actually has access to the internet. Per 100 persons, you have 144 phones. Some people have more than one phone. It's not uncommon, isn't it? So this is beginning. This is broadband, not such a big deal, but for faster, So this is my second point. The second point is during this transition period, not only did people's livelihood, their wages, per capita income increased, the country got richer, but actually they now begin to have access to actually alternative information. In the past, they did not. They were subjected to only whatever was offered, given to them by the regime. Now you could actually, just like us here, we could actually, you don't believe in anything RTM tells you, that's okay. You have other news, So this is how it was. Open telecoms to FDIs, new licenses is given to 3 foreign companies, Ooredoo, Viettel, Telenor, in addition to the state electrical enterprise, MPT, which is the one I have, MPT. It's the cheapest, the slowest. I think it is, this is, what do we say? This is a G, what? 5G now, isn't it? This one is 2G. So, okay. So the manufacturing also changes during this whole period and average, maybe look at the bottom here. The average GDP, 29 rose to 6.8%. It dropped again in 2020 and it's down to minus 18 in 2021. Poverty is increasing after the coup. Okay, but this item shouldn't be there. But generally, it's been the economy was doing well during this transition period. The third item that's important to keep in mind is the reforms that take place in the educational sector. In the new 2008 Constitution, it is clearly stated we want to provide basic education to all the people. The NLD proclaimed that we will spend 20% every year on education. Of course, they haven't touched that yet, but this was an aspiration. So how do they do this? How do you increase the number of students who go to school? First, you increase the number of teachers. So they have this very, it's a big problem. There are so many people who are graduates, but they cannot go and become teachers because they don't have, so to speak, the diploma of education or the certificate of education. So this government comes around and says, that's the least of our problems. There are these graduates who know more than these students. They can share something. Let us do a 1 month adjustment course for these people. So they found a way to handle this. But they also brought in teachers who were in the monastic schools and give them salaries. So the number of teachers increased, again. And then they also grants were given to EBEP teachers, ethnic basic education providers. These were schools which didn't teach in Burmese. They taught in Karen. They taught in Kachin. They taught in Chin language. But they were quite, organized quite systematically. And they, in some of these liberated zones, IDP areas, they had been there for donkeys. And they were very committed to providing education for children. So this was one way. We increased the number of teachers so that we can increase the number of students attending schools. We built new schools, including they provided money to the ethnic-based basic education providers and the monastic schools. Get them to help us recognize something that's, so this endeared at least the NDP and NLD population, endeared them actually to the non-Burma people. Provide stipends to poor to allow them to continue education. Pay the students to buy uniforms, textbooks, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this was very important. In 2008, prior to the reform period, total number of students, 7 million, rises, 2015, 8.8 million. That hits about, I cannot verify the figures, but by 2020, it's close to 10 million. And this is 99, 97, 98%, universal education already. So as far as they're concerned, we've hit the target of providing basic education to everybody. So the focus was now on, like in Malaysia, let's look at then secondary school, secondary school enrollment. So it also begins to climb. 48%, 68%. Expenditure of government also rises, and it also rises by another measure. Plus, because you began to get a lot of aid, especially for a non-controversial topic like, education. You've got a lot of foreign aid for this purpose. So my point here is that actually more and more people went to school. They probably enjoyed going to school. They learned, and they began to ask questions, so to speak. So this is just a breakdown of who is where in different levels of education. And then we switch gear to talk about actually the uprising that then took place following the coup in 2021. 1st February 2021, the coup d'etat takes place. And within 3 weeks, huge demonstrations were taking place. 22, again, numerology, 22nd of February 2021. Very auspicious day. Millions of people showed, 1 million people came out to protest throughout the country. In Mandalay, in Naypyidaw, which is the capital, and this is in Yangon. And what's so interesting, if you look carefully at all the pictures, these are all the millennials and the Gen Z. They showed up for the strikes and they used social media to organize. They contacted everybody. So, it's sort of like when, the special branch here also, they used to come. Who is in charge? Who organized this? Is it Anwar? Or is it Dato' Ui here? But our response actually is nobody did. We just text one another. And everybody just showed up. And this is what they were doing. So it's this. And why? Of course, because everybody is using the handphone now. During that period of transition, electricity is available for them to recharge their phones. They can buy cheap phones from China. And there was this. So there were young priests. This in Patin, Irrawaddy. So I was doing some of these pictures together. I was talking to a church group. So I wanted to show that the church was also involved. In Loiko is in the southeast part of Myanmar, just next to Thailand. Loiko is the Kaya state, and a very Catholic area. Missionaries there were Italians, whereas here there was a lot of French missionaries, but there they are Italian missionaries. The protests against the coup then began to be organized systematically. First of all, by the civil disobedience movement, the CDM, led by young doctors and nurses who stopped work, spread to teachers, civil servants, transport, and so on and so forth. So from the public sector to the private sector. And even the vendors and hawkers who actually began to distribute their food freely. Young NLD MPs then, they formed the committee representing the Pidong Suluto, CRPH. Young because the older people didn't want to think out of the box. No, we'll wait, we cannot. These people say, let's move. Let's set up our own group. Let's do something about the situation. So they began to do this. And they reached out also to young MPs from North Malaysia. You're not supposed to work with people from other parties, but the young people said, no, we're in the same boat at this point in time. Then they called this general strike committees formed, students, NGO activists, Confederation of Trade Unions were involved. They organized strikes and mass demonstrators. And this included older people, the unionists. They included people from the generation of 88. Some of the other things were more young people. This one was very white. And then the ethnic people said, we have to form our separate organization. General Strike Committee, nationalities, representing the ethnic nationalities. And they were the ones who pushed 5 demands. We want you to get rid of this stupid constitution, which is anti the minorities. We want you to actually create a federal democratic republic. And then we want actually a good share of the economy, and so on and so forth. So they insisted on this, and then let's work together, which they did. So the new developments now is, unlike in 88, when the student uprising was suppressed in 3 months, the struggle has continued into the 16th month. And doesn't look like it's going to wane. If anything, it's going to get stronger. A national unity government, principal officers have been announced, ministries have been established. And some of these people are in the country. Some of these people are in Chiang Mai and in the Mesot. They're all Mesai at the north, Chiang Mai and in Mesot. So they're all there. And on 7th September, the acting president of the NUG, Dualashila, announced that a People's Defense Force had been formed. Very localized PDFs. But we will bring it all together. This is not in the ethnic areas. This is actually in the Burma areas, in northern part, Sagaing state, Magwe in the middle part, Mandalay, northern part of Mandalay. So this is all these areas. He called the civilian officers of the, SAC is the State Administrative Council, which is the military, asked them to step down. All of you step down. And the military and police officers to join the NUG. And this is slowly, it's not like a flood yet, but increasingly people are actually pulling out. Because as the military resorts to burning and shooting, some of them don't want to be too much involved in these kinds of reprisals. So they are beginning to withdraw. And some of them have actually crossed over to the other side. Lashila called upon the ethnic groups. The term they use is EAO, and recently they call themselves ERO, Ethnic Revolutionary Organizations, who have been fighting the military for decades. Ask them to begin to attack the junta. Don't fight against one another. Don't fight, fight against the junta. Because these people fight against one another. The Northern Shan and Northern Southern Shan, they've got different armies and they war against one another as well. Partly because there's also an opium trade involved. Yeah. So in this situation then, Burma and EAOs have had contact. It was easier for them to actually work together this time around. In 1988, actually, prior to that, the Burma people had very, very little connection with the ethnic armed organizations, who tended to be in the very peripheral areas. But during the transition period, perhaps the most effort was put by Aung San Suu Kyi to try to achieve a peace agreement. And so she was getting all these signatories to come to sit down together for a national ceasefire agreement. And actually, she didn't go very far beyond the regime, the military, what the military had achieved previously. Except that now everything was formalized, whereas military prior to this was doing it on an ad hoc basis. Their commander, they reach an agreement. Now, actually, they formalized this. They actually signed a document about this. And although she did giving this ceasefire involving all the ethnic armed organizations, they met one another. They sat down, deliberated, and now they were talking about, shall we fight together against the junta? It's not as though they don't know each other like previously. Now they actually had some prior contact with one another. It facilitated actually sitting down. How can I help you? What can I get back in return? Will you promise me a federalism that is, sympathetic to my demands? It has, apart from this government, National Unity Government, sometimes it's referred to as the exile, government in exile. Sometimes it is referred to as the shadow government. Sometimes also referred to the civilian government. Also, and of course, the terrorists, sometimes the military calls them the terrorist government. It has prepared the document Federal Democracy Charter, which is actually, in effect, an interim constitution. The plan is to create a democratic and centralized Federal Democratic Union, and this is very clear in part 1 of the document. I have access to this. It's been translated, it's distributed to people who don't read in the Burmese. And then the part 2 is what is the roadmap that we have. So the roadmap is the institutions that the institutions that we need to establish, and who do we begin to bring into this arrangement. On this National Unity Consultative Council as well. And this was in a sense in response to the General Strike Committee nationalities, because they insisted, if you're going to come on board and work with you, we want representation. Your NUG is overwhelming overwhelmingly NLD, because the NLD won like 90% of all the seats. So they claim the right to head all the ministries, to be in charge of every department and so on and so forth. They said, no, if we're going to work together, you must share power with us. Let us plan for tomorrow as we should. So let us then create this consultative council involving the wider society, including the EAOs, ethnic armed organizations. It's sort of like an extended version of the parliament. And we'll move above all towards drafting a new constitution. The new constitution will be based on the charter above, put an end to the military's domination and control, and provide for clear separation of religion from matters of government. Because they feared in the 2008 constitution, during UNO's time, UNO made Buddhism the official religion. During under the new constitution 2008, they gave special status to Buddhism. So the Muslims, the Christians were dead against this. They wanted it to be like the Indian constitution, very secular, and treat all the religions equally. So they wanted this separation of religion from matters of government. The draft, what was interesting is, apart from this, the ministries were very serious. They began to draft federal education and federal health policies. And where are they? They are in the jungle. They're not controlling Naypyidaw. They're not controlling any state, but they're already beginning to draft these things. And then they are deliberated upon from the township bottom up. Township to district level, to state or regional level, and finally, they haven't reached that top yet because they are not in charge at top. It's the military which is still in charge. So they began to do this. And then they began to also restructure local government, again from the bottom up. Now, in retrospect, this restructuring of local government during the NLD era was very, very important because it broke the stranglehold of the military over civil society. This is my next slide. In February 2012, during President Thein Sein's time, he was from the military party. He already amended the law to allow for elections of the village tracts. This is the village tracts and wards in the cities. Sort of like what we used to have here, isn't it? That's the one. Yeah, so they wanted to go back to this. State and regional municipal laws were also amended to allow the formation of township municipal councils through elections. This is Myanmar, during a period when the military regime was nominally in charge. This is before the NLD. And here we are scared of local government and local government elections. So this is happening there. And March 2013, establishment of township development support committees, which was basically the nominees for the year were actually elections, dry elections. How did they do this? Half of the ward and village, but I must mention that half of the ward and village tract committees were only elected. The other half were ex officios, because the rationale was, you villagers, you small timers don't have the capacity. We train, engineers and technicians, and we have the expertise. So half only of the seats will be filled by you, half we will come along. Every 10 households elect representatives. These representatives then chose an administrator among themselves. And then they nominated these people into the Development Affairs Committee, which coordinated with the Development Affairs Organization. This is made up of all the ex-officio people. What they do? They local infrastructure development, roads, trains, canals, improve transparency, accountability in revenue collection, budget expenditure. I am actually, when I read about this, when I heard about this, when I was still in Myanmar, I thought that this was so insignificant. Nothing, only half elected as well. But I didn't realize that actually it has turned out to be so very important. Because what it meant with elections is that people bought into this reform. For the first time, they bought into a system, at the local level. It was decentralized in nature. The chief minister, instead of the union minister, was in charge. Oversight, supervisory. So it actually, you reported back to the state, not to the minister, as previously. Hiring and firing personnel by the state government. In the case of, so a lot of these ethnic areas, they just thought, okay, it will be my Mon, my Karen, my Kachin prime minister. I don't mind listening to him, but I don't want this stupid Bama fella, lording over me about affairs. So this was, in a sense, a very important change. People bought into the system. The municipal, township, municipal councils, partially elected. They were, however, included in development decisions and opened up for more participation and representation of local governance. State region Lutos, different compositions in their different, so each one had their own, they made their own laws. There was not a union law, it was state level law. But the most important thing, the process was initiated by the old government under the military. They amended the constitution, they introduced the elections. The NLD government, brilliant stroke, it moved the General Administrative Department, GAD, not GAP, GAD. It was moved from the Ministry of Home Affairs, which was under a general, to the Minister of Union Affairs, out of the control of the military. In the 208 Constitution, the military controls defense, border security, and home affairs. And the GAD is part of home affairs. In fact, it's the mainstay. It is the mainstay of the GAD. So now they have moved the GAD out of the hands of the military into the hands of the minister in charge of union affairs. Significantly, 5 days after the coup, 5 months after the coup, 5 months after the coup, they moved the GAD back. The military moved it back to the Ministry of Home Affairs, which they dominated and controlled, from the Minister of, actually, Union Affairs. So this was very important change that took place. So this is then the process, this is, I took from the book, from somebody's book, and then this is how to show. Now these people then begin to actually have a say in the running of their state region. Not just receiving, but actually there was a process flowing from the bottom up, upwards as well. Finally, this role of the youth in all this transformation, extremely important. 10 years, the millennials, Gen Z completed education, they experienced freedom, they joined NGOs, voted, and they participated in politics. Compared to their parents, this younger generation appears fearless. They have declared that this is a fight to the finish. They will be the last generation to live under military rule. Many new young leaders have just emerged. Some of the workshops that I conduct with them online and all that, it's all young people. And they have so many questions. It's a delight actually to interact with them. They include Burma, not only Burma Buddhists who support the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi, but also ethnic minorities, Karen, Kaya, Kachin states, which have large Christian populations, and also there are Muslims and Hindus. Chinese and Rohingyas too have declared their opposition to the junta. And some of them have begun to work with these people in the movement. In a study, Students and Teachers as Agents of Democratization and National Conciliation, by this lady, this woman called Rosalie Metro, argues that both groups, teachers, students, have these funds of knowledge, located within themselves. It's sort of like a Freire type of an argument. Paulo Freire, pedagogy of the oppressed. You might be a peasant, down and out. Some of these younger people don't understand, maybe remember Paulo Freire. Freire was one of our gurus in the 70s and earlier. Yeah, and he called this a pedagogy of the oppressed. There's always a fountain of knowledge in ourselves. Don't subscribe to the banking theory of knowledge. Somebody has to bank knowledge into you. He says, no, there's already embedded in us this knowledge that emerges from our daily lives. So he's saying that it's already there. In education, he says we must step into this to actually help people reorient themselves to play democratic politics, to help them bridge the divide among ourselves. In education, reform occurs slowly, she tells. She's an educationist. And she says that it usually starts with 5%, doubles up to 10%, then 20%, then 40%, and then it just escalates. So he said it will take time, and this was the program which began to be introduced in this NNER, National Network on Education Reform, which worked with the NLD to bring about, it was not part of the Ministry of Education, but was outside, it was helping them to do this. And they also worked not only in their own schools, but in ethnic basic education providers schools, not run by the MOE. The youth were taught to become critical of ethnic discrimination, help people to break through language barriers in classroom, because there are many, many situations in Myanmar where the Karen don't know how to speak Burmese, or the Rakhine person doesn't know. Rohingya, they don't speak your language. So this is very much the case in these places. So how do you try to build a nation out of this situation? So this woman is telling us that actually, we have to be very slow, but there is something in us which allows us to bridge these divides, promote, and then it also helps us it also promotes an alternative way of teaching, learning, not by rote, relying on memory, but through critical thinking and opposing corruption. So this is there. You just knew. So that educational system was bankrupt. They've not been reformed for a long, long time. It wasn't going anywhere. No new students. Certainly they had new students. They invested a lot of money into this, and they began to bring in new pedagogical methods. And this was how they were doing this various things. I want to project this into the wider society. So we began to reopen and began to expand public and private tertiary institutions of learning. I couldn't find the necessary data on how many universities, colleges have been established since things opened up. Because they've also got these fly-by-night operations. There are some good private universities, but there are a lot of fly-by-night concerns as well. And so here, nonetheless, there has been a tremendous increase in the number of post-secondary students in full-time and part-time studies, including online. And personally, we were conducting some of our courses in this manner, online. There has also been, in tandem with this, an explosion of CSOs, NGOs, and INGOs. Before coming here, today I just discovered this new website run by MIMU, Myanmar Information Management Unit. It's actually an NGO which collects all the data from any NGO, international NGO, which is involved in Myanmar, and then puts it together in this website. And it is so state-of-the-art. I was so impressed by it, and this is MIMU, M-I-M-U, 5 Ws. Who is providing whatever, where, when, what are they providing, and to whom. So they've got all this data. It comes down to the level of the village tract. They've got maps. They've mapped this out. It's so impressive, but also scary. Very, very scary. Because, if you're a very good military, logistics person, you just grab these data and then you can use this. You can pin down, these people in this village, there is actually this kind of a unit there. Let's go and destroy it tomorrow. So this was done. Now this NGOs then, this organization that I was working for, called Forum Federations, ran workshops. Just an example, a little anecdote. We ran workshops. We call them stakeholder workshops, 2.5-day workshops. Over a period of 9 years or so, we ran maybe 200 of these. And then the locals took over. And they did the terminology that they use is they ran cascading workshops. We were doing state level, they took it down to the districts and down to townships. And over that period, the estimate is that we reached out to about 40,000 people. One NGO. And I don't know what 2.5-hour workshop on federalism means. But at least perhaps it became a good word, because prior to the opening of Myanmar, federalism was taboo. You cannot use this word. And when we started running our workshops there, we were told in no uncertain terms by our colleagues, our partners there, do not use the word federalism. You can use decentralization, devolution, deconcentration, but never federalism. Until lo and behold, the president from the military, he started talking federalism. And then Aung San Suu Kyi herself began to talk federalism. And of course, we also began to pick up the term. But my point here is that actually, this is very important. It percolates down. There is sort of a knock-on effect. Not just via the schools, but through these kinds of workshopping run by NGOs and so on and so forth over time. Next point then is the rise of the digital society in urban Myanmar, at least, allow access to alternative information via internet and social media. Whereas in 1988, if you're wondering why that protest lasted 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and then people had to flee, and they didn't think about starting a new government. They didn't talk about, getting rid of military and writing a new constitution. Partly because they had no access to alternative information. These people know. They know how to Google everything. So, and they're very much like ourselves. In fact, I learned a lot of stuff from them. Last, these people then, through these kinds of mechanisms, they contributed to the same process of democratization and national reconciliation among the post-secondary school students in the urban areas. The economy has been badly affected by the recent turn of events. There's been a boycott of companies owned by the military and its cronies. Foreign businesses have begun to withdraw. The World Bank, July 2021, estimated 1 million jobs have been lost. Schools have been closed ever since. Government schools. Alternative schools are all sprouting out. By the way, there are about 250,000 teachers who are on strike. And they've been on strike since the CDM. Still February. But it's not as though they're not doing any teaching. They're doing teaching at their own private, learning centers. So this is, they're boycotting. One of the interesting things that is happening. In this place, the businesses, they have the 4-digit, buy lottery tickets and all that. Even now boycotting that as well. You know, it was so popular previously. Everybody was prepared to go and, take a punt, try to hit the jackpot. But nobody is touching that dirty lottery anymore. So exports have been down, imports down compared to a year ago. And then the kyat has depreciated 23% in a few months against the USD. Between February and July, it's not 2016, 2020. Inflation, food rising, government has no revenue to collect, including cannot sell their lottery tickets. No new FDIs, no tourists. Shopping malls and hotels shuttered. They actually shuttered because they're so afraid people come in to loot. So it's just shuttered. GDP expected to fall by 18% since 2020, 30% if we go back to 2019, the worst ever fall in Myanmar's history. So people are resorting to, there's this huge shadow economy which allows people to survive. A lot of bartering, a lot of, it's incredible on such, meager salaries, wages, people actually can survive. Yeah. The good news, a few new leaders have publicly apologized to Rohingya people for not speaking out previously. And this has included Dr. Sasa, the Minister of International Cooperation, and Susana Lalaso, Minister for Women, Youth, Children Affairs. And this was reported, these are people, quite well known. The well-known people have also taken to social media to express the same. Some authors, movie actresses, they've done the same. Min Koneng, a major leader of the generation of 88, student uprising, has explained this new empathy and unity in this manner. This empathy for one another, especially from non-Burma people towards this Burma people. We in the cities, meaning we the Burma people, are finally experiencing the same brutality and wickedness of the military like our brethren in other areas, in the ethnic areas. We have gradually come to understand each other more and more and feel more sympathy for one another. Because remember, benign neglect in the Buddhist Burma areas, in the center, all around the frontier areas, 4 cuts, or the 3 alls, burn all, loot all, kill all. So this is Min Koneng telling us. Min Koneng is somebody who will be a leader in the future, if and when. He was one of the most prominent leaders of 88, and he continues to have a very, people begin to continue to respect him. These are armed conflict zones, some new areas. So this is like the Mon area, Mon people, Tanintari at the bottom. Kayin, this is also called Kayin is Kaya state. Kayin is Karen. Kaya is here. Then the Shan. This is new. This Sagain, Mandalay, these are all Burma areas. But there's a lot of fighting going on in these regions. Kachin has traditionally been at war with the center, Shan areas as well. The Karen have broken out again. They had peace treaties with Naypyidaw, but again they have now resorted to fighting back. And then this is Rakhine, and here there is the Arakan, ALA, Arakan Liberation, forgotten, but it's the Arakan Army is here. So they have a civilian group, a party, and then the Arakan Army. There's a peace. It posed a tremendous threat to the Naypyidaw people, but for a long time, they began to have a ceasefire from about 2016 or so. However, the general in charge of the Arakan Army is getting a bit fed up with how the military is treating the young people. He said, how can you do this to your own young people? Not his own people, because he would fight back without hesitation, but other young people. So he's equally concerned now. And people are hoping that this place will not actually break out in a new round of violence again in this area. Okay, we'll stop here for the presentation.
Okay. I don't know if you realize it, but you have just sat through a masterclass on contemporary Myanmar politics. I won't start with any question of my own. I will join in when you others have asked questions. So may I open to the floor immediately?
Any comments?
Any comments first? Yeah. Well, comments. I could start with one. Is this a spontaneous experiment in anarchism in a way, where you have everything is very much bottom up. There's hardly a central economy. It's large parts of Myanmar seems to be, well, a stateless economy in a way, and things are happening outside a currency economy practically. Is that what we're seeing? And can such a thing continue? If we refer back to the Spanish experiment or something like that.
I mean, at the point of independence, at the point of colonialism, a lot of the countries of Southeast Asia were made plural in a sense, because whereas you used to be a little kingdom of your own, you will now collapse together into one territory. And this was the case of Burma. The Kachins, everybody was just thrown into, because it happened to be British Burma. So you throw it, it's sort of like British India. You threw everybody in together. And in 1947, when Aung San, the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, General Aung San tried to build his new country, pulled it together. It was the Anti-Fascist People's Freedom League, APFL. He created his organization. Actually, he had people who were minorities with him. And he wanted to reach out beyond, and he said, we will create a federation. People are not very clear about what it was. So let's create a federalism. We'll give it a go for 10 years. And if after 10 years, any of you feel that you don't want to belong to this, you have the right to secede. And people have not forgotten that promise Aung San he gave, you see. Because they want, even if we come together tomorrow, they want an exit door. Suppose it doesn't work out, I might want to leave. Will you give me that guarantee? So these other people are saying, yeah, but you can't go into a marriage, and think about divorcing. At the same time, you see, it defeats the purpose. So it's there's this dilemma. But these people, it's you talk about Malaysia having problems. I think we are so comfortable here compared to them. We might not love one another, but we are small enough for us to interact with one another, and we learn to accommodate one another. In this place, they didn't even meet one another anywhere. And the terrain is so very different. I remember we tried to go to Loiko, which is the capital of the state of Kaya. And these people they are Kaya people, or Karani, you sometimes call them the Karani. And we looked at the map. No, we were supposed to fly, but the flight was cancelled. So, we looked at the map, and this man from Chin, he said, oh, so close. Let's just drive there. We'll fly to Naypyidaw, the capital, and then we'll just drive there. So I said, I estimate if this in my place, Chin state will take 5 hours. Let's say 8 hours. And actually it turned out to be overnight. It was because you go up and down the mountains. So this is the problem, you see. And you just had no communication system with one another. Now at least you have your IT.
Yeah.
You have the phones, you can send things out. But people are finally beginning to learn each other's languages. I think it will become a problem. It's not so much anarchist tendency so much as I think people are thinking about going their own way.
Right.
Yeah, they want to keep that option open. If it doesn't work out, allow me to actually live peacefully. Yeah. And thank heavens we are, I'm not caught in that kind of situation.
What is the language situation? What are the common languages that are being sought here? English, Burma, or how do they communicate?
English is very, very, very common language. Most people who are educated, most people who went to school in the higher education, basic higher education, basic education system would speak Burmese. But if you are somebody who grew up in the border areas, you were actually forced out of your original hometown. The Ministry of Education never came there. And, you ended up receiving education under the EBEP, Ethnic Basic Education Providers. Of course, they are teaching in Karen, or they are teaching in Kachin, or they are teaching in Mon. So there's this thing. Aung San Suu Kyi's government, to her credit, they began to absorb these people into the national education system. Began to fund them. You can come in. And it is kosher, it is halal to speak 2 languages, to teach 2 languages in your state. Hopefully, and I think increasingly this group of people who are involved in the movement accept the point that we need a common national language. But like hell, we want to learn our own language as well. So this is the, when you have limited resources, it becomes a problem.
Any questions? Yes, please.
Throughout your presentation, it was fascinating. You pointed out that in fact there is a government with various things, but behind the scenes is the military. They are the ones who are really holding the power. Now, what happens when the government doesn't collect enough revenue, as is happening now? How is the military funded? Because in all the countries where there is a military, it takes up a large proportion of the GDP or the income. Sorry, my question is there. Thank you.
It's a very important question. But traditionally, of course, that's why in the 1988 reforms, after, Slop removed General Newman. The 1988 student-led uprising was actually triggered off by an economic downturn. Actually, in Malaysia, we also had a downturn of the economy at the same time. So when that happened over there, they decided they have to go and investigate how do we handle this problem. So they said, okay, let's open the economy. But also they launched their own GLCs. Myanmar Holdings, Economic Holdings, MEH, and Myanmar MCEC or something like that, another corporation. So these people then began to create, okay, we'll open the economy, we'll open the tourists. Where do they stay? They stay in my hotel. I've stayed in some of these hotels, they're worse. But they use a lot of teak though. It's full of teak, so it's but huge rooms, but no sense of warmth, in a hotel when you're away from home. So anyway, so they did this hotels, and then they went to banks. They began to establish. So the government began to buy a stake in the new economy itself, and and then later on they went into joint ventures with locals as well as from 1997 onwards with foreigners. The problem now is, of course, everything is on hold. Nobody is supposed to go and purchase lottery ticket from you, or to go to your hotel. They're all pulling up. And besides, no tourists are coming and everything. So this is one reason why this system could actually collapse. And the revolutionaries, and they call themselves the revolutionaries, they're conducting a revolution, no bones about this. there's a revolution, they expect this government's control of the economy to actually give way. And meanwhile, one of the problems, that's why they've taken this position vis-a-vis ASEAN. ASEAN is trying to organize for humanitarian aid to come in to be delivered through the SAC, State Administrative Council, the military. And they're saying, please do not do that. Because they will definitely take a cut. Plus, they will end up trying to legitimize themselves. So this is the problem as well. I mean, usually, it's not a problem for regimes to actually open a humanitarian corridor. Even you see this happening in Ukraine, you open these humanitarian corridors. No politics about this now. So they're prepared, but in this case, the revolutionaries are saying, please don't. Please don't. We are managing all right. It will just be used by them to actually perpetuate the power.
Yeah. Next question, please.
Thank you for your enlightening talk, Professor. The question I would like to ask is geo-economic one. It relates to the previous strongman that used to run Myanmar, Tenzin, General Tenzin. He was a good friend of mine. And I can understand, based on my assessment, he did not want to devolve power to a military strongman. In fact, he was quite insistent of trying to bring in the West and also to balance the role of the emerging superpower like China to try to uplift the economic position of Myanmar. The question I would like to ask of you is this. There has been tremendous change of foreign policy from the Obama administration, which was very supportive of Tenzin. Now, when Trump came in, there has been a tendency for isolation and also less engagement with countries like Myanmar. So has this, in a sense, contributed and emboldened the young Turks in the military to change the geopolitical blueprint that was laid out by Tenzin? Because to me, this move is an economic harakiri move. I don't see anything that comes out of it unless this new cadre of generals say to themselves, well, there is no point for us to engage the US because even they are decoupling from the idea of globalization and free trade. So we must all just go our own way because globalization was essentially an incentive. It is an incentive to join the American group so that we give you trade, so that you join us and you stand with us to fight against the communists, or in the case, China. So do you think that the change in American policy, was it to some extent contributory to what has happened in Myanmar? Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself first, so we know who you are?
My name is Dr. Chong. I'm the managing director of Transgrow. We run businesses in Myanmar.
Okay, thank you.
In the Shan region. And we have interests also in India. So this question has, it's a bit selfish. It has a business dimension. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Francis?
Yeah, it's a very important question. Actually, I like General Tenzin. I think he opened up the system. And like I showed you just now, he actually initiated he brought some reform to the GAD, and the local government. He brought in, actually introduced elections, and not only that, he initiated the Myanmar Peace Council. Myanmar Peace Center, and he appointed a general who was a Wong Lin, who was actually a very, he was genuine about pursuing peace. And during that period of time, they actually got the National Ceasefire Agreement already in place. And after NLD came to power, she could only add 3 more smaller signatories to it. The major signatories were already there, but there were also a group of them in the Northern Alliance who were not interested to sign, just bothering China and all that. So anyway, this was for Tian Xian actually, and he actually decided after that, I won't get involved in politics anymore. So he didn't, he didn't side with this military coup. He didn't continue in USDP. He boycotted the next elections. So and some of my friends who were in the peace movement actually appreciated very much how he facilitated this process. How does America fit into this picture? I'm not informed. I really cannot speculate on this. But America did, of course, began to shift its focus during that period of time, it was always the Middle Eastern, and there's an American here, she can answer. So they began to do that. And for me, I was trying to explain that there are structural reasons why this change took place. The reforms were quite inevitable. It would lead to alternative information. You cannot control information anymore. More and more people are getting educated, which is a very good thing. And which nobody was opposing. Plus, there's more all these kinds of people purchasing the phones and all that. And I was also saying that actually a peace process allowed for people to establish contact with one another. And people bought into politics through actually not just the NGO movements, but actually through elections at the local government level. I was telling Meredith Weiss, who is a professor of political science in America, I was telling her that actually the struggle today in Myanmar is at the local government level, between the people, between the SAC and actually, the local communities. And an alternative system to provide services, to actually dispense justice, make decisions about land disputes, marriage disputes, is actually emerging already. And they are also providing education, and they have some of them are organizing health clinics already. So actually there's, this is where that struggle is taking place. It's not at the level of Nipitor, and there's of course, clashes here and there, but that struggle is also taking place at the bottom. And for me, that's actually what will lead to, this dangerous situation of perhaps an anarchy. Because actually there doesn't seem to be a united center that is actually clear-cut to everybody. There's an NUG, but there are still the EAO, ethnic armed organizations, who are not 100% giving you their support, like they weren't to her, Dosu, like they weren't to Tian Xian and all that. They also have their own agenda. So this for me, this is part of the problem. And I'm not sure, Meredith, you want to add something about America? How do you look at it?
Well, I'm more a specialist. I know more about Malaysian politics than U.S. politics, but I will say, I do think that it's certainly plausible that the Trump administration signaled that they would not care what happens in Southeast Asia, including in Myanmar. But I think the timing suggests that that's still not a wholly satisfying answer, in as much as the time of the coup was after the Trump administration, when there was a real thought that the Biden administration would actually be much more aggressive in re-pursuing ties with Southeast Asia in the same vein that Obama had, though perhaps less aggressively and with a somewhat different Indo-Pacific framework and so on. but that was still going to be a priority. So I'm not sure that I would say that it wasn't a discouraging factor probably, but at the same time, I don't think that that's probably as salient as other factors, especially domestic ones.
Okay. Dr. Sri, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having this talk on Myanmar, because it's a place that has so much connection with Penang that very often people are not aware. We are one of the places where, for the whole period of history, very strong connections were developed. And we have, like every major city of Myanmar, we have a name in Penang, with the Burma Road and Mandalin, Molmin, and and name it. Yeah, and it's just very remarkable. The whole question of Buddhist, Burmese Buddhist temples, with the Thai, and one time we were recruiting doctors from Myanmar to come here. We have a thing called like a Burma clinic, still like a legacy of this. The University of Rangoon was one of the really outstanding universities at that time, and I was curious about what's happening to that place, because at one time that was the inspiration for higher education in Malaysia. Many of the lecturers, the great geographers and histories, all were coming from Rangoon. The other thing I wanted to mention was Aung Suu Kyi. You mentioned a father who was a really great transformer. She herself was, for many people, one of the greatest disappointments, particularly in terms, and I think this is unforgivable, her attitudes over the Rohingyas, her silence in that particular area. And there was even a movement with regard to getting the Nobel Prize removed from her, because how could someone who had fought for justice ignore such an important genocidal program that was going on? And I was quite interested in your position on that particular area also. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
What's happened to University of Rangoon? An easier question. It's the first time I visited it, because I, like you, I wanted to just check out this place. So illustrious, and to my surprise, it was so run down, because actually they don't hold classes there anymore. So what they did to some of the major universities was they hived it off, broke them up into separate Institute of Language and Literature, Institute of Science and Technology, Institute of Medicine. So they just, and the grounds where was where the big, in 1988, big student uprising held within campus itself. They marched down the main alley into Ledan, which is the big student quarter, like the Quartier Latin, in France, like this. No more, no chance. However, towards the end of, and by the way, and they stopped teaching social sciences. Stopped teaching social science altogether. Towards the end of Aung San Suu Kyi's period, they began to bring back the social sciences. So places like Duke University, some Salah University, one of the Thai universities were helping them to actually re-engage, with the social sciences again. And I gave some lectures in some of these new classes, and there's so many people so excited about studying the social sciences once again. Okay, the question about Aung San Suu Kyi. I don't want to defend her, but I want to try to understand her position. And I think the best defense of her comes from Tan Min Oo, who is the grandson of U Tan. He's written about this. He writes about Burmese politics and current affairs very prolifically. So check out Tan Min Oo, and so he talks about how people put her on this pedestal, the Western media, put her on this pedestal They expected her to do all this, and they were so disappointed when she didn't deliver. He said, to me, my country is almost a failed state, almost as bad as, not as bad as, Somali, but getting there. He said, this was a country which was under dictatorship for 50 years, which was cut off from the rest of the world and the global economy for 60 years, which was everything, no investment in education prior to NLD, no investment in health. The conditions in hospitals are atrocious. But I make it a point to try to look at this, go and visit. Like I told you, Rangoon University last year closed down. So we expected that she would stand up for all of these things. Aung San Suu Kyi's position, as I understand it from my friends who I love with her, is that actually she decided, given all the restrictions, I would nonetheless work with this military regime because minimally I want to bring, she wanted, first and foremost, she always said this, I wanted to bring about peace in my country. But her efforts in trying to achieve that peace conference failed. She called the second conference, it was called the Second Panglong Conference. First one was convened by her father. She was calling the Second Panglong Conference. But like I said, only 3 new signatories. There were 5, 6 main players who still didn't come on board. So she was very disappointed in that. But like I said, her legacy is actually in education. And she's done wonders there. And I think this is one of the things. So she thought that maybe I will engage with them. And every, if you go to Yangon, like I was doing, 3 months I come again after I've not been there. Hey, there's a new road. And then suddenly there's this new thing. So in the urban quarters, you see this happening. And I was to my surprise when you begin to go outside, you also begin to see some improvement. And I must say that actually I was very impressed with the engineering capabilities of the military in Myanmar, because they built some of the finest bridges. I will always ask, who built this bridge? It was spectacular, but actually in Myanmar, it was the Myanmar military which did that, because the military reserved for themselves their own, they ran 2 military medical schools, they had their own engineering schools, and they recruited the best and the brightest to join the military army. And they had quarters, down to quarters for the individual soldier. So people bought into this system. So she couldn't remove this system. She said, I will work with them. And I hope to do all this for my people. I think to some extent she succeeded to do that. She didn't prioritize Rohingyas for sure. I think it's fair to criticize for her. But I think she is endeared. People love her in her country. And they would die for her, like they have. Perhaps not the ethnic armed groups and all that, but a lot of Myanmar people. And she has taken a very strong position against, however, the Buddhist extremists. I think that one she has done.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a question from one of our audience on YouTube. His name is Johan Saravanamutu.
Okay.
So his question is, if Myanmar is now a failed state, for how long can the military remain in power? What is China's role, if there is any, in the present situation?
This is Johan Saravanamutu, my former colleague now in Singapore. And trust him to ask these difficult things. So the first question is, how long will the military stay in power? It's anybody's guess, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of like the Ukraine situation. If you continue pumping aid and funds and all that to the NATO, the Zelensky and all that, it could actually last for a while. But, you could also sue for peace. And I'm not sure in this case the young people are definitely saying this is a fight to the end. It might not be realistic. I shouldn't gloss over the differences within the movement. There are differences. Like I've already suggested to you, there's a difference between the NUG and also the EAO. And they are not taking the order from Dua Lashila, the acting, president, interim president. They're not taking orders from him. But they're on friendly terms. They talk with one another. There are ethnic armed organizations. We have already attending peace talks with the regime. Because actually this new national unity government cannot offer them anything. They are just in exile. They are in the shadows, whereas the military can offer them something. Even previously, in Kachin State, there were jade mines and other gem mines, which they would allocate to the military. This is for you. You mine this. You take all the profit, but these others are mine. You don't come and touch it. So you reach a quid pro quo that way. So it's Johan, out of my capacity to answer you, with a hard and fast, how many years from henceforth. But I can say that this group of young people, they are there for the long haul. There are some of the ethnic armed groups, particularly the Karen, the Mon, the Kaya, and the Chin, who are very much with them, with this movement. But there are other organizations which are not allied with the National Unity Government. And they are prepared to actually meet. They haven't signed anything, they haven't met any, but you're asking us to meet, they are prepared to sit down with you. And the military regime, they've been resorting to a lot of strafing, from the plains, burning a lot of places. Not something that is new. They've always done this, if you care to look back in history. What is China's role in all of this? China has definitely geostrategic interests. It is interesting that India also has not come out to condemn the junta, because they don't want China, which has not condemned the junta, to actually come out tops. They want to be friends with this. And Pakistan, Bangladesh, on the other hand, are very concerned about the refugee situation and how Muslims are being treated in that situation. So I think the downfall of this regime will be actually due to the economy. Regimes throughout history can resort to repression to control and maintain themselves, but they don't know how to develop the economy. This is Suharto's case. They don't know how to allow for citizens to participate in the political process. Age-old argument by Huntington, political order in changing societies. The military will dig their own grave because they cannot accommodate the needs of ordinary people to participate, nor do they know how to develop the economy. But to control, maintain order is very important. One of, this professor whom I like very much, who talks about the strong state, he says the strong state is not just the one which can penetrate into society, it is also the strong state which can actually persuade people. The way that a Trump is a strong state, because he can persuade people, up to a point. You cannot persuade them to give up their guns. But this is, in a sense, whereas the Chinese are, at this point, I'm not sure that they've got new investments, but this is very important for them because this is their corridor to the Indian Ocean. I've gone to this Chokpyu. Chokpyu is this small port in the Indian Ocean. Through Chokpyu, the oil pipeline will go up all the way to the Yunnan. When Aung San Suu Kyi, this was signed, this deal was signed under Thein Sein's time. It's been there for a long time. And when she came, she also froze this project, and she demanded, they renegotiated like the East Coast Rail Line, renegotiated, and then she said, okay, you can go ahead, provided you create an industrial zone in Chokpyu. And they actually did that. The Chinese developed an industrial zone, so there's sort of like a production of a lot of non-durables in that area. So it goes up. And Chinese, I think the Chinese foreign policy cannot be understood only in terms of how it relates to its neighbors to protect its geostrategic interests. The Chinese would think that this is actually a related issue about my neighbors, and they have a different attitude towards their immediate neighbors, which is very distinct from their relationship with, say, Africa or the Central Asian countries and all that. There they are prepared to play economic diplomacy. So that's all I can say, Johan.
Okay, Meredith, another question from you.
So this actually picks up on a couple of the things that you've been saying. So one was that I was wondering about, even if there's constitution drafting, a sort of elite level negotiation with the NUG and the EAOs, if you go back to the Weberian notion of a state, the monopolization of the means of coercion is not in effect. And so the extent to which, apart from the criticism of Aung San Suu Kyi by ethnic groups previously, not just Rohingya, but just in terms of not returning the Panglong Agreement, how credible these commitments are to federalism, to a new agreement, whether or not that filters down to a populace that's not fully in her favor, to the ethnic armed organizations, all of that. And it sounds like there's not a clear answer. But then the other looming question for me was another thing that Mary Callahan writes on, for instance, is the extent to which the military could stay in power for so long, in part because they penetrated so deeply into society, that everyone had somebody who was with the USDP or the USDA initially, or in the military, as a means of social mobility. It was, just sort of normalized in that way. But that also means that when there's been this CDM for so long, and when there's been this level of unrest for so long, and when you have these local level innovations against the military, that must be causing rifts within families and within, local communities. If the military is not, even with some Chinese support, if they're not able now to provide the same rents, the same access to money that they did previously, how much is the military likely to either split or implode, or how solid is it still as a corporate organization this long into the current cycle of craziness?
Yeah, it's not my forte, okay? I don't study the military, but my old professor, dead and gone, used to talk about how he looked at the Thai military, he looked at Indonesian military, and he used to talk about how actually fissures always emerge from within. And it's very, very difficult for people from outside to actually confront this monster, to remove it. And especially since, in a situation like Myanmar, where they have the monopoly of firepower. So, how do you confront this situation? And this group of young people, I've just read a thesis written by somebody who talks about the difficulty they had in trying to persuade themselves to take up arms to fight the military. We are a Buddhist nation. How do you, the old generation of 88, they just talked about opening the political system to have party elections, multi-party elections and all that. This group is saying, we have to defend ourselves, so we call our army the People's Defense Force. And you are the terrorists. So you had this whole vocabulary had to be created, to explain why we are now, beginning to take up arms, fight these people. Oh, because you're terrorizing us. We need to defend ourselves. Otherwise, you'll destroy us, and you're denying us our vote. So they begin to buy into this other vocabulary. So I find this actually quite fascinating because we don't talk in these terms here. We don't. And perhaps we're so strapped by this ethnic way of looking, oh, Malays like that. They just think, oh, Chinese, look at them. That's how we actually understand our politics. So, but there they actually put questioning. What I find also exciting about the new discussion that's taking place about the young people, I don't read Myanmar. But I've got a lot of good friends who do a lot of good studies, and I buy into, I rely on hearsay. So so these people are telling me they have a concept of the Tangin-tha. Tangin-tha is Bumiputra. Bumiputra over there comprises 135 ethnic groups. It's the 7 major groups and subdivisions of them. And then there are also 1 or 2 Muslim groups, Kama, is also recognized as one of the 135. But not the Rohingya, not the Chinese, not the Indians, whether they are Muslim Indians or Hindu Indians, no, and definitely not Chinese as well. So this is, they have this concept, and there are 3 categories of citizenship. One is automatic citizenship, must be because you are one of the 135 recognized Tangin-tha. Number 2, you must have applied for a piece of paper prior to the National Registration Act, the Citizenship Act of 1984. A lot of these minorities, including the Rohingya people, of course, they didn't apply for any of these stupid papers. And they cannot then show proof that, I have been here since when. And so there's no such a, and then, because with that, you can actually become, you can become a associate, I think that's the term they use, associate citizen, associate citizen. And then there's another category, which allows 1, 2, because you're already born here. So at least in Malaysia, actually, there's jus sanguinis, jus soli. And by jus soli, we are here. We claim the right to be, we are sons of the soil already. So you're born here, we are entitled to citizenship. And our quarrel is actually, but the Indonesian migrant worker, should his daughter and son be allowed citizenship or not? And then third part, we have ruled, no, at least one must be, So in a sense, we have, so in our case, it's very clear-cut and actually quite generous. Not in that situation. Not in that situation. So it is this young group of people who have come along. They don't want to talk about the Tangin-tha anymore. They talk about common citizenship. And they don't use the word Tangin-tha, they're using the term Numeo Zun. Different types of people, regardless of religion, and all of you can be entitled to become a citizen. So I find that very exciting, you see. And their parents didn't talk in those terms, they just accepted. I've got a very good friend who works with us in the office. He is a Muslim, they gave him Pakistani descent, although of course, when he came from, his parents came from British India, not Pakistan. But they attributed, so he's a Pakistan, and he fell in love with a Shan girl. So the daughter, that's born, has on the identity, the registration, is a chop, the mother is Shan, and the father is, Pakistan Burmese citizen. I don't know what she will become. And to be entitled to any of these documents, to enter school, to go to school, you need to go and get registered. You must get these papers. And at that point in time, they go through selection, they go through the whole process again. And then to get your national registration card, when you're in secondary school, lower secondary school, you again have to do this whole process. And then there is, of course, the passport, if you want to go anywhere. So the Rohingya people actually don't even bother because they've got no papers, so they're not allowed to go to, to travel out of their village. They don't even have access to school unless you're in the IDP, and then you have the internal displaced education programs and all that there. So it's a very very sad situation.
Yeah. I suppose it's almost oxymoronic to talk about a nation state with 135 minorities, isn't it? It's a world in itself.
Yeah,
So-
different categories of citizenship.
Yeah, one question there. It'll have to be.
Were you associated with the education faculty in the University of Malaysia?
No.
And you wrote a book, not the same Francis Law? No. Oh, not the same person. But there was a book on education written by Francis Law Kok Hua. Were you the one?
I'm Francis Loh Kok Wah, but I'm not. I didn't teach in University of Malaysia, and I'm not in education.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
One very short last question. Anyone? No. May I put in a comment? Maybe a question. But I was wondering, in northern Southeast Asia, anyway, you have the military as being very powerful in all the states, really, right? And so that to the extent of embodying the nation itself. So what we're seeing in Myanmar, if the military, and probably the military sees itself as Myanmar and can't imagine a Myanmar without a military in charge. So is that where the battle actually is, an ideational battle as well over what Myanmar is supposed to be? It can't be represented by monarchs, therefore it has to be represented by the military. But can that be replaced with something else that isn't even clear yet from coming out from these young people?
I mean, there is that it's picking up steam. This kind of in contrast to geopolitical, this one is more like maybe there's a ethno, basis to something, a national basis lah. And all these people in the northern mainland, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, they're prone to authoritarian rule, and even if the Vietnamese are slightly different, they fought against imperialism, but they are not, Theravada, they are Mahayana Buddhists, different. So there are all these explanations. Again, for me, it is, I don't want to buy into that argument.
Okay.
And for me, it is a legacy. You see, for me, if you start from the perspective of colonialism, and colonialism actually cut and divided us into the kinds of nation states that we are today, with the multinational states that we are today. And there was one problem of sojourners arriving, Chinese, Indians, Arabs, Indonesians crossing the archipelago and all that. But there was also indigenous people who were then assembled together arbitrarily, so that Malays in Sumatra separated from Malays, in the peninsula, or Patani from Kedah, Perlis, and so forth. And so in this case too, the Shan Lao people have been divided into some of them are in Burma, some of them are in northern Thailand, and also in Laos. They're actually one people. They've got variations of the same. By the way, I'm wearing a Shan shirt today. But I've got a batik t-shirt outside though. So anyway, so it's a, well, my point was that actually I don't want to subscribe to, this kinds of overgeneralization. I think there's a history. And I think some of the problems that we are facing today actually started from the period of colonialism. So it is interesting that as we are talking about post-colonial situation and, these people are actually they're fighting their independence angst still. And I've so often, every of these states, of the 7 states, everyone is writing their own state constitution. Without any reference to a federal constitution. I don't know what's going to happen. And everybody is setting up their own educational system, which is, I was, commenting on how full of initiative, full of energy, they're responding to the times. They're providing primary school education to their children, but one is in Mon, the other one is in Kaya, another one in this dialect in Hak, in Chin. The next hill is another dialect in Chin. So it's this. So, but what is the educational policy at the center? How do you train teachers? There's no agreement. Okay, what about transfer? Suppose I have to go and serve, but you have taught me in Mon, how can I go and function in Kaya state? So federalism requires both decentralization, and there are some functions which need to be centralized. For me, this is, in Malaysia, actually, we have not had a serious discussion about federalism. Our system is extremely centralized, very, very centralized. We have not actually looked at the benefits of decentralization whatsoever. We have not at all. India has a theoretical model which is it's beautiful, but in practice, it's something else.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine in India, you can go from kindergarten to university, you can study in Gujarati, or in Bengali, or in, Tamil. But if you want to go good university, okay, then you go to, all these English language ones. Or the best universities in India are run by the federal government. All the IITs, all the IIMs, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Hindu Benares University, and Islamic Aligarh University, Muslim University. That's all the federal government does. And then they look at Bangladesh, not Bangladesh, I mean Bengal, West Bengal so rich, but Bihar so poor. Oh, I will send some of their teachers here. So the federal government plays that role. Or I will give a milk coupon to all the children, regardless of wherever they are in the country. Or you will build, boarding houses to house, the Harijans who cannot continue school because they don't have housing. So the federal government plays this role. In Canada, there is no federal minister of education. Okay, none. It's all local state government, state ministers. So I think Malaysia needs to go into, and we are going to do that.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. Watch this page. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have to stop. Yeah. Let's give a big thank you to Francis.